It is with great pleasure to welcome and introduce our three esteemed guests tonight. Tonight's conversation is the final event of this spring's Rouse Artists Visiting Lecture Series. The Rouse series illuminates new perspectives on the built environment by sharing the work of a broad range of visual artists, writers, directors, and other creatives at the GSD. This semester, the Rouse visitors of this semester have included Sarah Oppenheimer, Khalil Joseph, and Otabang Kanga. Such events hold particular importance because they offer our community the opportunity to engage with a plurality of design methodologies and cultural practices that enrich our investments here at the school. Before I introduce tonight's speaker, I'd like to mention that our last event of the spring semester will be tomorrow here in Piper, April 24th at 6:30 by the landscape architect Stig L. Anderson, who will be giving a talk entitled After Nature. Tonight's event is a conversation with Rolf and Sterling Ruby, moderated by Jessica Morgan. Jessica Morgan is Natalie Gunsberg, director of the DIA Art Foundation. Since joining the DIA in January 2015, Morgan has helped advance the DIA's mission by presenting an array of new and exciting programs, such as the Dream House by Lamont Young, Marian Zazilia, and Jung Hee Choi, as well as new exhibitions of works by Robert Ryman, Hane Darbovin, Kishio Shuga, and Francois Morellet in New York City. She has held two previous curatorial positions at the Tate Modern from 2002 to 2010 and from 2010 to 2015. Morgan was also the artistic director of the 10th annual Gwangju Biennial in 2014. She also held previously the chief curator at the Institute of Contemporary Art in Boston, where she organized exhibitions by, among others, Karsten Haller, Ellen Gallagher, Olafur Eliasson, Marlene Dumas, Carrie James Marshall, and Cornelia Parker. Sterling Ruby was born in Bitburg, Germany. He graduated in 1996 from the Pennsylvania School of Art and Design. He received his BFA in 2002 from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. And in 2005, he received his MFA from the Art Center College of Design in Pasadena. His work has been featured in numerous solo and group exhibitions. Rolf has led varied and distinguished tenureships at some of the world's most notable fashion houses. Rolf currently serves as the Chief Creative Officer at Calvin Klein Inc., and in this role, Mr. Simmons leads the creative strategy of the Calvin Klein brand globally across the designer, contemporary, bridge, underwear, and home categories. In addition to overseeing all aspects of the global marketing and communications, he also oversees the visual creative services and story design. Simmons was born in Belgium, where he later studied and obtained a degree in industrial design and furniture design. In 1995, he launched his eponymous line, Rolf Simmons. In 2005, he was appointed the creative director of Jill Sander, where he served at the helm for several years. Mr. Simmons assumed the position of creative director at Dior in 2012, a position he held until 2015. Sorry, I just need a quick glass of water. Tonight's conversation will take as a point of departure the collaborative practice between Rolf Simmons and Sterling Ruby. Sterling's work is visceral and beguiling. Sterling shapes new forms with material plasticity, playing with scale and mixing mediums and media. Rolf has had a striking imprint on menswear and fashion through his eponymous avant-garde men's line and with his leadership of high fashion houses. His work wields masterful tailoring, asymmetrical shapes, oversized silhouettes, and pop culture references to balance traditional codes with progressive aesthetics and cultural awareness. While both Rolf and Sterling have spearheaded their own respective crafts and disciplines, the collaboration speaks to their shared affinities of clothes, art, and environments, a willingness to break with traditional disciplinary silos, and an enduring friendship. Over the last decade, they have closely worked on unique collaborations. In 2008, the Rolf Simmons Tokyo store. In 2010, their capsule collection. In 2013, as most of you have probably seen the documentary, Dior and I, collaborating on Simmons' debut collection for Dior's Haute Couture, where Sterling's SP paintings were the basis of a custom silk fabric used to create 3 dresses and 1 coat. In 2014, they presented, which is actually my personal favorite, the Rolf Simmons Sterling Ruby menswear, a full fall-winter collection at Paris Fashion Week. The collection featured bleach-splattered denim produced at Sterling's studio as well as graphic elements on sweatshirts, coats, and t-shirts. With both names on the label, this collaboration visualized shared ideas of deconstruction and reconstruction, and a collaging of visual motifs. For me, it is their most recent collaborations for the American fashion house, Calvin Klein, that has synthesized the relationship between clothes, art, and environments at a scale unmatched in their previous collaborations. In 2017, Roth's American Classics campaign, photographed by Willy van de Peer, showcases Calvin Klein's signature pieces, denim jeans, cotton tanks, and briefs, in combination with works by famous artists Andy Warhol, Dan Flavin, and of course, Sterling Ruby. In the same year, he asked Sterling to create a new aesthetic language for the brand, a series of signature motifs that reflected the light and dark sides of Americana. But most notably, Sterling's total room works for the showroom at Calvin Klein headquarters and New York flagship store display his ability to work across mediums, to produce environments that operate as immersive collages. In the headquarters, soft sculptures, fabric, metal, and glass choreograph a rich environment of graphic surfaces juxtaposed and integrated with fragments of Americana motifs. In the flagship store, a vibrant yellow coats the interior surfaces while scaffolding of the same color is deployed throughout the space as an infinite substrate collaged with Americana motifs, products, figurines, and ornamental tapestry. The spatial scaffolding is fresh and inventive by taking a typical structure often found in the context of New York City, a ready-made, and allowing it to be contextual and transformative, symbolizing a moment in time and its imminent undoing to reveal new fronts. In both cases, we see the undertones of previous collaborations between Roth and Sterling, and how fashion has scaled up spatially, and art has scaled down to occupy the body, or vice versa. Their years of collaborative work is a cross-section in how art and fashion, two distinct and cultural creative practices, cross-pollinate through references, inspiration, appropriation, and spaces. The specific combination of their visual languages, processes, and identities produces a transcendence of both disciplines of art and fashion, and in their own way, Roth and Sterling are together reconfiguring the cultural landscape. I've talked long enough. So let's welcome Ralph, Sterling, and Jessica to the stage.
Thank you, Sean, and thank you everybody here at GSD. You've done a fantastic job of organizing tonight's event. I'm very honored to be here. My job is really just to ask questions, so I'll try and talk as little as possible. I think you've said many great things, Sean, and I agree with you. The 2014 collection, that was a highlight. But I think, for me, certainly one of the extraordinary things about your collaboration is, on the one hand, the length of time that you've worked together, which is very unusual. We've had many examples of art and fashion coming together, but this is no sort of slapping an image on a handbag. This is something that's really developed over many years and on many platforms, which I think is the other fascinating part of how you've worked together. It's not, it's not image on product. It's really something that's been integrated into so many different ways in which you've worked together. And I hope that's really what we can talk about today. But to backtrack, I know we have some people here who are probably extraordinary experts, probably far more so than me, in fact, in both of your work. But having talked to you a bit, I certainly have things that I want to hear you speak about. But perhaps for those who are not so familiar, we can actually begin at the beginning, so to speak. And if I understand correctly, you really met Raf really as a collector, looking at your work, Sterling. And you met in LA in sort of different circumstances, not as collaborators, but really as collector and artist. And I assume that at that point you also discovered this sort of peculiar coincidence that in fact you grew up in areas not that far from each other and in sort of somewhat similar circumstances with a sort of military background, but also a small semi-rural environment. And I was wondering if you can just talk a bit about how you met and evolved as how that conversation, I suppose, evolved initially. You can't do that all night.
Hi, everybody. That's right. Ralph and I first met at my studio in Los Angeles. This was a studio that was maybe 10 or so more years ago. Actually, maybe 14 years ago. And I had been working with a gallery in Los Angeles called Mark Fox, and Mark Fox brought Raph to the studio for a studio visit, and this is something that doesn't happen all the time, and when it does happen, it's always a kind of awkward situation for me to bring somebody into such a private space. And the thing that was completely different about the first studio that I did with Raph was that we really got along extremely well. And over the years, we started to talk about how we grew up, what we had experienced, and we started to understand that we had a lot of commonalities together, growing up in mostly rural settings. Even though I was in Pennsylvania, he was in Belgium. My mother was Dutch, and she had grown up in this little town called Noonan, which is close to Eindhoven, and all of my family still lives there. And it turns out that we actually only about 20 minutes away from each other in the Netherlands and in Belgium. Right.
Well, I had bought some ceramics from him in the early days, not knowing who he was. And Mark Fox was his gallerist, whom I was very close friends with already. And I rarely do studio visits. I still don't know why, because actually I find them very interesting and fascinating. And Mark said, I think you should meet Sterling. It was very much Mark saying, like, you should come, you should come. And I don't remember exactly the year, but I do remember it was just before you showed your first paintings, or when you just showed your first paintings, so you probably know better the timing. And the rest you said already, so we became friends. And it's not that we saw each other all the time, but we would stay in touch. And there was also a period I was going a lot to LA, more than now, unfortunately, due to the work circumstances, and we would always see each other when we would go to LA, and that's how it started.
I was sort of interested in both of your paths in terms of sort of how you developed and perhaps the figures that were important for you, Sterling, probably Mike Kelly being a very important figure, and Van Beirendonck for you, Raph. But Sterling, you've often talked to me about also reacting against your teachings or your fathers, so to speak, or mothers, the minimal tradition in particular, and how that sort of process of responding against, I suppose, your teaching and was a very important development. But I wondered if there was any of that for you as well, Raph. I mean, you had this sort of extraordinary context in Belgium with a real moment, obviously, that we're still living with. But was there something that you were also reacting against?
Well, if it comes to art, I was not reacting against. I think I was very much trying to be informed, trying to go deeply into it. I go back to a Belgian curator. His name is Jan Hoed, who did a very interesting exhibition in a town called Ghent called Chambre d'Amis. He invited incredible artists into the private houses of people. And during the summer, you could just visit, during weekends mainly, I remember, you could visit the houses. So suddenly all this art that we kind of knew was in domestic environments, which was very, very interesting. And ever since, I think I kind of got obsessed with, art in a way, and just inform myself more and more and more about especially contemporary art and the early generation of Mike Kelly and Paul McCarthy, Cindy Sherman, Richard Prince, like the kind of generation that was shaping up at the time that I started looking. Bruce Neumann also. And shortly after, he did Documenta, which I also went to see, which was incredible. And at the same time, I entered industrial design, so I'm not a graduated fashion designer at all. I studied industrial design, graduated with furniture, almost ended up doing car design. And when I graduated, there was another important thing happened in Belgium, which I think is important to say. There were 6 Belgian designers who were taught under one direction from a woman called Linda Loppa. at the Antwerp Academy. I think most of you know the most of these names. The most famous ones, Martin Margiela, Dries van Noten, Walter van Beerdonk, Dirk van Zanen, Marina J. and de Meulemeester. And they kind of grouped themselves and started showing together in London, and it made a big buzz on the international scene. And I think for lots of us, for lots of my generation, it became something, I don't know, to kind of aspire or something, you know, like I was already in industrial design, and at the same time I knew that I couldn't really find my way. So I knew I will have to go to Italy maybe to find producers or to find people who can help me with my furniture. At the same time, there was this whole thing happening in Antwerp around me, basically. And that's when I thought, you know what, let's give it a shot. And that's when I started designing clothes.
Inspiring, but it must also have been quite overwhelming. I mean, as a sort of conceptual level of work, those designers, it's sort of interesting how you're describing this dual trajectory of being interested and engaged with an artistic practice that was highly conceptual, as well as being in the midst of these designers who were obviously playing with the boundaries of fashion in a way that I think most people had not become used to. Can also be how to find your own space within that is a difficult conundrum, perhaps. No?
I think I was way too naive at that point to
worry about it.
Yeah, to worry about that. I also never really saw any of them highly conceptual except one, personally. I did have a strong feeling about being reactive. I definitely felt like I do not want that my stuff looks like any of them since day one.
And so what happened between you met and then asking Sterling to design the store in Tokyo? So, I mean, obviously something must have happened in between. You had been speaking, but I mean, was it it felt like a logical move for you to invite him at that point? I mean, you had never done anything like that, to my knowledge, right, Sterling?
No, I hadn't. No, this was really a kind of culmination of a number of years of just hanging around the fireplace, you know, figuratively, but also literally. I started, you know, continuing to visit family in the Netherlands. I also, you know, I started exhibiting throughout Europe pretty frequently, and, you know, between Raf's trips to Los Angeles and my trips to Belgium, you know, we really understood that we had a lot of like similarities, both in the scenarios of things that we found most influential. And when you approached me to do the store, I think because I had never done anything like that before, I took it in a direction that I think was mostly like, how do you collapse space? And how do you make it desirable enough that people want to go in and kind of shop? So it was, for me, an initiation into this problem-solving scenario that didn't really have the same principles that making a piece of sculpture or a painting did.
I think if we go that much back in time, maybe even before the Tokyo store, we did not want to, or we did not dare to say things to each other that we actually maybe already felt. We were very interested in each other's practices, and maybe we had the desire to do things that people could not see us doing. Like, he might have had already an interest in clothes. Actually, he did. I know it now. And I might have had already an interest in other things than clothes. So it was a very Bauhausian kind of thinking, in a way, if you now try to kind of maybe put it in a more intellectual, you know what I mean?
It doesn't work.
It's,
sure.
But at that time it wasn't like that. We wouldn't talk about it in that way at all. Actually, we still don't. It's just something that I think that maybe we were too afraid or too shy to already speak about it, that we were interested to enter in each other's worlds far more than when you see collaborations these days. And I think it has a lot to do with the friendship, but also with the interest in each other's practice and the trust. Because I am a person who is extremely interested in other people's body of work, but not necessarily to a point that I would say, oh, come, let's do a label together. It's not even tagged Raf Simons for that season. It's tagged you and me together for that season, or a year, or 5 years, whatever we might still do. And I think that's the big difference.
I think for the longest time we had a friendship, and we had a like-minded set of standards that we kind of followed, things that we found influential. But I agree with Raf that for such a long time, I think that we looked at each other's perspective, choices to be completely opposite of one another. Just the industries of them seemed at odds. And I don't know about you, but I started to realize that from a conceptual, kind of scenario, I always believed that collage from a historical lineage, if you look at Picasso or Schwitters, it's like this idea that like you force things that weren't necessarily meant to go into one another, that this like illicit merger created a new hybrid. And I think you and I started to see people doing things that were cross-pollinating between art and fashion, but not doing it very well.
I think that in lots of cases it's not a natural desire, or it's not a natural going together. I think it's very often just a decision that is a business decision. Very often there might be maybe something that triggers, like a designer who's interested in an artist, but then all the rest, it's like a package to sell. I think we never really had that intention. And if it works, it works. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. It was a natural desire. I also, in the early days when I started to come in his environment, I immediately felt that he was somebody who makes this total environment. It's not only about the sculpture or the painting or the collage. It's an environment, an attitude. It's a very unique point of view about the body of work and everything that surrounds it, and everything that and everybody even who enters it and connects to it. And I think that's also how I like to see my own things. It doesn't really matter who it is at the end of the day. It's how you kind of bring it out.
Sterling, you didn't feel any sense of taboo crossing into the world of fashion, the questions around, whether it's to do with form of commodity, disinterest perhaps in the unique object, which most of the art world is built around, the sort of mythology of the unique form. I imagine there must have been some moment where you felt, ooh.
I was,
Dirty fashion.
yeah. Well, no, it's true, because I had a lot of hesitation, but it wasn't me hesitating. It was a lot of people around me hesitating.
Uh-huh.
I mean, I had art dealers just blatantly saying, "This is a bad idea. Don't do this." And I have to say, prior to my knowledge with Raf, I had really loved this notion of like centered Bauhaus structure, and I had been making my own clothes, but I wasn't thinking of them as fashion. And I had been making environments, but I was thinking of them like in this kind of, historical predecessor of like the 80s installation movement. And I think over time I started to feel so, disheartened by the idea of like what art was becoming. And if there was like a commodification within fashion, there was certainly a commodification happening 10 years ago with art. And I started to just see it be somewhat cynical and ironic and kind of blasphemous. And at that point, I really just kind of decided that we had been friends for such a long time, and we had had so many great discussions about what we could do, not necessarily thinking about it in a lineage of compartmentalizations, but just whatever we wanted to do, we could do. And it became something that we started to base, off of craft, ideology, conceptual practices, but not necessarily believe that it was one or the other.
You've both expressed to me that you felt liberation in each other's spheres in some way, that the confines of the realm that you're most familiar with were then, in some sense, removed when you entered into the relative world of the other, which is interesting. But maybe you were just beginning to touch on that, Sterling. Maybe you can both speak. How does it work on a practical level? I mean, obviously doing the store was one thing, but then as you began to think about producing the collection together, I mean, that's a completely different level of collaboration in terms of process and thinking and production. You were not living in the same places. It's,
Trust, I think.
Yeah.
Otherwise it's not possible. And you share. But I mean, these days there was a lot of ways to share things, you know.
It wasn't always very strategic. You know, I mean, when we started developing ideas for the store, when we started developing ideas for, you know, the collection, I mean, anybody who's seen Dior and I will remember the scene where, like, Raph takes a photo of the dress. I'm going to call you out here a little bit, but I don't know if you've noticed, like, the phone that Raph was using at the time. It was this old flip phone. And, you know, I mean, for a long time, we would exchange any way possible through DHL, FedEx, WhatsApp, texting, you know, sending emails
WhatsApp
between
lately,
staffs. I mean, at one point in time, it really felt like we had merged the two studios together. I mean, Bianca is here and Tyler is right behind her. You know, the two studios really became this kind of homogenized, you know, everybody was working with one another on these projects.
But
and
quite
it has
literally,
just-
would members of your studios go back and forth between?
Yes, but I think we never really felt any hierarchy, how you say,
Yeah.
in like who should do what amount. I mean, obviously, when he was doing store, he was taking a big amount. I would say 99%. For him, when we did the collection, I was taking a big amount on me. That's how the studio is structured. That's how, you know, like no matter what we do together, one has more expertise or experience or is better structured, but it's not a problem for us. I think if that would be like a problem, it could never work because, yeah, we're obviously not together.
I like the fact that some of it was so low tech. You know, we would print things out, send it via FedEx, and then the next day we'd get like a cell phone, you know, snap of, you know, that printout wrapped and pinned around a model. You know, that was kind of, for me, it was really exciting. It was instantaneous. It wasn't so premeditative. And it really became something that was very, it was open, but it kind of, like, it was something that I didn't have in art. And I don't necessarily know if it was something that Raph had in
So very different. I mean, obviously, you have a large studio, Sterling, with many people working there. Raph, you collaborate on many levels in a way with many different people. But this collaboration you see is completely different to the type of activity.
I think it's very intimate between two of us. I think we usually keep it very between us in the first stage, and then it becomes very technical. But first of all, like I said, there is no hierarchy. I think it's the most important. Also not in the thinking process. And I mean, for me, I believe very strongly in collaboration. Even if I launched my brand and I went through it basically alone as a creative person, I have assistants obviously, but I do think that what is really interesting for me, I always question if I think for myself, I hope it doesn't sound pretentious, I think I have a great idea. If I can share it with somebody whose work and person I admire, and it comes together, it's a greater idea. It's a better idea then. If we both love it, it must be even better than when I love it. That's what I think.